here in South Florida to make sure that they're counting the ballots properly. Remember my friend Hugh Hewitt, my colleague Hugh Hewitt, wrote a book on exactly this subject, and I believe it was titled, If It's Not Close, They Can't Cheat, Crushing the Democrats in Every Election and Why Your Life Depends on It. He wrote it 6 years ago. If it's not close, they can't cheat. Ha! That's exactly right. But it is close, so they can cheat. I assume whenever it is close that the Democrats will come up with votes that don't exist. This is Dennis Prager. I welcome you to my show. A lot to talk to you about. We're going to have a report on what is happening in Florida. They always find votes. Did you ever notice that? They always find the necessary number of votes, and always in predominantly Democratic areas. Now, that's quite remarkable, isn't it? So either Democrats are totally incompetent or totally crooked. Of course, there is the possibility of sheer coincidence, like in the case of Al Franken, how he got elected, and that was the determining vote on Obamacare. Had they not cheated in Minnesota, and I believe with all my heart and soul that they cheated in Minnesota there. They find ballots in boxes. I never opened. I mean, there are third world countries that have more competent election results than Democratic areas like Broward County in Florida. But of course, it doesn't bother anybody on the left because cheating to defeat the right is noble. That's the whole point. As I've said from the beginning of my life as an adult, that lying is not truth is not a left-wing value. This is just another example of it. I don't think there's anybody listening, frankly. I think even in your heart, if you're on the left, you know this is fraud. They find tens of thousands of ballots when they lose by tens of thousands of votes. They just happen to find them, and they're overwhelmingly Democrat, but it's really honest. And what does it mean? How do you find ballot? What does that even mean? Ballots are lost? That's what we are led to believe. Well, I'm going to have an expert on this. Even though I'm here, I'm not the expert on it. I do have an expert on it. Of course, everybody I'm talking to here just rolls his or her eyes. They know it's a fraud. And it doesn't even matter. And the woman who's in charge of it has already been suspected of being involved in a voter fraud previously. But it's all okay because power equals good. Because left is good, and you can do anything. You can break eggs to make omelets. That's the way the saying goes. Max Eden, as I mentioned to you, is a senior fellow at that phenomenal place. I do believe that all the conservatives at the Manhattan Institute have some level of masochism, but hey, everybody has their quirk. How a conservative stays in Manhattan is one of the puzzles up there with why God invented the mosquito. But they do. Max Eden, welcome to the Dennis Prager Show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Dennis.
I know that was the oddest introduction you've ever received, and I just want you to know the questions will be sober. But do you live in Manhattan?
I live in D.C., actually, so it's a masochist of a different strain.
Yeah, yes, but it really is different in Washington. There are kindred spirits all over the place, even if it is run by the left. Anyway,
even outside of my particular institute, there are others.
Yes, exactly. That's my point, right? So you have I read your piece. Is it in the Federalist? Where was your piece today?
This is just a tweet storm that I put out yesterday, actually.
Oh, a tweet storm. That's right. Yes. So bring us up to speed here. This is really remarkable. I mentioned my colleague Hugh Hewitt, who wrote a book, If It Isn't Close, what is it? They Can't Cheat. I figure 60,000 or whatever the vote it was in the two races, governor and senator in Florida, you'd think that might be enough, but apparently it isn't.
No, and it's peculiar that I would even have known anything to say about this, because I do education. I live in D.C. I work at the Manhattan Institute. So how do I know about the Broward Board of Elections supervisor? The story is, when you and I chatted back in February, I was kind of curious as to what had gone on in Parkland inside that school in Stoneman Douglas before the massacre, and we talked about the role that school policies might have played, and I was curious, so I went down there. And I met with some of the families of the victims, and they wanted answers. And once they had the answers, they wanted change. So we ran school board members in the primary trying to oust the school board members who supported the superintendent and all of his politically correct policies. And we just had the wind at our backs. So people were saying the one thing we don't have, the one thing we don't control, is who counts the ballots. And Brenda Snipes, the Board of Election supervisor, is crooked. And at first I thought, okay, like this is kind of something that, the left can be too easy to say voter suppression, the right can be too easy to say voter fraud. But they said, no, this isn't a left-right thing. This is the fact that a guy who ran against Debbie Wasserman Schultz did an intensive statistical analysis of precinct by precinct, his race against her, where he lost by a far bigger margin than anybody expected. And professionals called it an implausible set of results, and he sued Brenda Snipes, who supervised the election, to say, don't destroy the ballots, let me see them. And after about a year of lawsuit, she says, oops, I destroyed the ballots. So that was kind of the first, oh, wow, what's going on here? And the plot just continued to thicken as this race went on, because when we got the results in, the school board race I was focusing on, we lost the primary, we lost early voting and absentee 60-40, and then won on election day. And that result is a very rare thing, but there was one thing that people had accused Brenda Snipes, the election supervisor, of doing, and that is opening ballots in secret and just throwing out thousands of Republican votes without anybody looking. So before this election, the Republicans had sued to say you can't open ballots in secret, and then the day of the primary election, she motioned for an injunction and opened up thousands of ballots in secret anyway. So we lost that school board race. Another man who lost his daughter, Ryan Petty, ran, and he was close enough for a recount. And if the recount went his way, he would have gone to the general. But during the course of the recount, they found 4,000 more ballots. And those 4,000 more ballots guaranteed that there wouldn't be a runoff. And so when I have all of that context in mind, and I read that Brenda Snipes is trying to find thousands and thousands of more ballots, and the more that unknown thousands of ballots come in, the more unfavorable the election looks for Republicans. I want to be very, very hesitant to make any allegations of these kind, but it's extremely suspicious, Dennis.
It's absolutely riveting and frightening what you just described. I'm going to continue with Max Eden of the Manhattan Institute about the Democrats trying to undo the Senate and governor races in Florida. You're listening to the Dennis Prager Show. Hi, everybody. Dennis Prager here. If there isn't fraud taking place in Broward County, Florida, I will take a leave of absence from my work as a radio talk show host. I mean that sincerely. Been on for 35 years, in part because people know that whether they agree with me or not, I care first and foremost about truth. But the left lies with the ease with which you breathe, and this is what is happening in Broward County. And there's a man who called me, I don't know, yeah, he's still on, in Minnesota. What's my proof of voter fraud in Minnesota with regard to Al Franken? I have no proof, sir. But but common sense asks a very interesting question. Why can I not mention, maybe Max Eden would know. Max, let me ask you a question. Do you know of cases where there has been a Democrat that has won, and then it was overturned by finding ballots for the Republican? For the Republican?
I know of no such cases, Dennis.
Right. Okay. I didn't think so. And I might add, Marco Rubio, senator from Florida, has just announced that he thinks that this Brenda Snipes is involved in a fraudulent enterprise with regard to the votes. Marco, this is from the Sun Sentinel here in Florida, where I am right now. Marco Rubio says he knows who's to blame for Florida election problems. Broward's Brenda Snipes. She is the elections commissioner in the county. It's an elected position. I have to ask you something. In California, when we vote, so I voted, of course, on Tuesday. I take my ballot to a box. I personally put it in the box. The box is sealed. How are ballots found in Florida, and even in California they can't be?
Well, it's a good question as to what happens to those boxes. There was a picture that went online late last night of a teacher who said, "Oh, I went to the gym and I found this box that appears to be a ballot box, and I haven't opened it because it's sealed, but I don't know what it's still doing here." And so the only, plausible explanation as to how this isn't fraud, if it's just, there's that old saying, never attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence, and possibly the one thing that could explain it is that Brenda Snipes and the people under her are massively incompetent, and they literally lose track of boxes of ballots and have no idea how many they've lost track of. And that's the best defense. Now, it seems almost less plausible than outright fraud to me, because I don't know how you can leave a room full of boxes and leave one box left.
Or that it's only Democrats who find boxes. That's what is an amazing thing to me. Either they're the only ones who lose boxes or the only ones who find boxes. How come Republicans are capable of guarding boxes even when Democrats win?
Well, I think it's that Republicans and generally not deep blue counties are more functional in general. I think that the best case for a Brenda Snipes is that there's something in her case and in other cases of just deep blue bureaucracies that breed this kind of incompetence. And so if you have systematically democratic institutions that are incompetent, then when they find votes, they'll turn up Democrat. But do I believe that? Not necessarily. That's the only charitable explanation.
What can Republicans do with regard to these newly found ballots in Broward County?
I mean, they should avail themselves of every legal avenue they can. I think that, Governor Scott should have taken action on Brenda Snipes far earlier, after she destroyed the ballots of a very progressive Bernie Sanders-esque Democrat who ran against Debbie Wasserman Schultz and said, "I want to see the ballots." The judge said, you have to show him the ballots. And she says, "Oh, I heard that, but I just destroyed the ballots. Sorry." Or the time that Brenda Snipes pushed back against a Republican-sponsored court injunction that said, you can't open the ballots in secret and throw out whichever Republican ones you don't like. And then on election day, she says, "Oh, I appeal that, so I'm going to do that right now." She shouldn't have been in charge at this point at all. And I think it's a sign that Republicans can be kind of supine about these things when they don't think that they will affect any constituencies outside. But right now, that's what
supine.
Should have been something.
I'm sorry to say, supine Republican is almost redundant.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
I know, because people don't know how to fight. They don't have the same malice in them that the Democrats do. Not all Democrats, but Democrats. And so they can't understand that others would need to be fought in that way. All right, listen, I will speak to you again next week, because this is of extreme importance. Thank you for your work, Max.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Dennis.
You're welcome. It's very, very distressing. Hi, everybody. I'm Dennis Prager. A caller from St. Paul, Minnesota, asked, "What's my proof of voter fraud in Minnesota?" This was from the 2008 Al Franken election that Norm Coleman, I believe, won. And I'm debating, do I go back there or not? There's such a powerful piece in the Wall Street Journal, which is not exactly a flame-throwing journal, November 12th, 2008. And it shows, for example, that there were two and a half times more corrections made for Mr. Franken than for Barack Obama, because Barack Obama won the state by a lot of votes, whereas Norm Coleman won by few votes. There is no proof. Any proof would be regarded in any event as not proof. They found hundreds of ballots in somebody's car. Not hundreds. 32 absentee ballots in Minneapolis's director of elections. She forgot to count them. They were in her car. Gee, this is what happens when a Republican doesn't win by such an overwhelming number that they can't cheat. So do I have proof? I don't know what. No. Yeah, this to me is beyond a shadow of a doubt, but it's not proof. I don't know. You'd have to have a video of somebody, I guess, doing the work of the Democratic Party. Al Franken's vote was the difference between Obamacare and no Obamacare. That's how important it was to cheat and rob Norm Coleman of his election. And that's happening now. Not 700 votes. Norm Coleman was won by 725, and that kept dwindling. Yeah, just keeps dwindling, even before a recount. That's the point. Even before a recount, Republican votes dwindle. It's very sad. The whole thing's very sad. Stay tuned. I'm Dennis Prager.
The Dennis Prager Show, live from the Relief Factor Pain-Free Studio.
Glenn Beck.
I was in Florida for the 2000 election. I was in Florida during the recount. I was in Florida after the recount. I was in Florida when they said, this will never happen again because we're going to a whole new system. We got this thing down. I was in Florida when I told Florida, if this happens again, we're coming for you. I was in Florida when Florida almost set the whole world on fire. I was in Texas watching Florida, and on Monday saying to Florida, I'm coming down with shovels and a saw, and we're going to dig, and then we're going to saw Florida off from the United States and just let it float into the middle of the ocean. Florida has done it again. Does anyone know what's going on in Broward County? It's been 72 hours, and they're still counting votes. In fact, in Broward County, they came out and said right away how many people came and voted. Then the next day, they came out and said, oh, there's about 10,000 more votes here. Wait a minute, what? Broward County is probably the most technologically advanced and economically developed areas in Florida, but for some reason, I just thought of it. They're probably using Common Core math, where the answer really doesn't matter. But I'd like to see how they got there. The Broward County election supervisor claims that she doesn't even know how many ballots are left to be counted. Could I ask the Broward County election supervisor how that's even possible? Isn't that your one job? You work really one night. One. It's your one job. Now, I don't know if Broward County election supervisor knows this, but literally every other county in the nation reported the results pretty much minute by minute. Not so in Broward County, Florida. Large dumps of voting results are being pushed out at late night hours. And curiously, they always seem to benefit the Democrats. Oh my gosh, look, we just found some more Democratic ballots. To say something is rotten in the county of Broward is being kind. Yesterday morning, a video was released on Twitter showing bags of ballots being transported in private vehicles and then loaded onto rental trucks. Now, is that your standard procedure? 'Cause if it is, I don't think you should have the job. I don't think this is legal. I'd like to ask, where were the, quote, supervisors? Who is maintaining the chain of custody? What the hell was the rental truck for? Who's to say that ballots weren't just taken out and burned and replaced with fakes? There's no one to say this. No one, because no one was supervising. This isn't legal. This is the reason why voting results are delayed and coming in late at night, because you just had to put it in the back of your Porsche and then take it out to some guys in the back of a truck. I don't know. It kind of seems a little shady, but hey, the ends justify the means. If we can just get a Democratic socialist in there, I'm sure he'll fix it. Probably shouldn't use the word fix when we're talking about voting in Florida. Yesterday afternoon, over 100 ballots were rejected in Miami after finding out the people that voted had voted multiple times. Republican Senate candidate Rick Scott has had enough. He's just filed a lawsuit late last night accusing Florida election officials of hiding information. The lawsuit even suggests that the election supervisor in Palm Beach County illegally used her own judgment. Palm Beach County, I swear to God. I lived in Florida in 2000. Palm Beach County. I'm not a guy who's for, just higgledy-piggledy executions. But I gotta tell you, what the hell is wrong with you? So they apparently their election supervisor took it upon herself just to determine voter intent when reviewing both damaged and incorrectly filled out ballots. So basically, she took the ballot and said, I don't know, it looks like they were trying to vote for the Democrat. This is insane. You are the only group of people that could take the hanging chads and make it worse. This appears like legitimate election tampering and fraud. Congratulations, Florida. You just showed that you're no better than countries like Russia. To steal a little bit from the great sage Forrest Gump, corrupt is as corrupt does.
It's Friday, November 9th. You're listening to the Glenn Beck program.
I think I could have handled it from any other state. Really could. I haven't snapped. It was happening here in Texas. I haven't snapped. They're looking into it. I just got a letter, an email in this morning that I have to read to you because it's happened in other states. And I haven't snapped. But Florida? Florida? The people who brought us selected, not elected? Oh, my gosh. You need a timeout. Everybody in Florida, you need a timeout. Let me read this to you here. Listen to this. Dear Glenn, I want you to know the state of Iowa yesterday. Our sister and daughter and son-in-law, who is a U.S. citizen but from Argentina and speaks with a heavy accent, went in to vote ahead of his wife. They handed him, my nephew, a voting ballot that was inside a plastic sheet. He went to the voting table before the machines, and when he looked at it, he saw that the ballot was already filled out with all of the Democratic candidates. He got angry and went back to them and said, "What are you doing? Give me a ballot that's blank." They seemed a little flustered, as if they were hiding something. My extended family believes the volunteers expected that he was an illegal who didn't know better by his thick accent and dark skin, which would be racist, of course. It seemed that they had a separate container with these pre-marked Democratic ballots. I am furious. My entire family is furious. My sister said trucks of illegals are taken to work in the town for Tyson. There are many of those that are being given these Democratic marked ballots at the voting station. Only a driver's license is required to vote there. The attendants tell them just to push it through the machine. Clear voter fraud. This is in Iowa. We don't need Russia to do it. We got our own people doing it. You're just not going to say anything today, are you?
I'm happy to say you were in a rant, and I didn't want to cut you off. Do you believe there was a mass voter fraud in California, in Florida? I mean, it's obviously
no. I don't
bizarre.
believe anything. I think that there is the possibility. I think we're just going to go through what we went through in 2000, where nothing is really, really super clear. It's just muddied waters and just helps us be a little more, 1968 in our spirit for the country.
Well, it's amazing because they have, they're supposed to. A recount is not necessarily bad, right? Every close election legally has a recount, so it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yes,
it's just the idea that they're supposed to in Broward County supposed to be able to say, "Hey, we have this many ballots left to count. And they just keep finding them." Like there's a story of this person working at a school who found a box that just said provisional ballots, and she was afraid to open it. Because she was afraid to tamper with evidence. When they opened it, it was just a bunch of signs and pencils, and there weren't any ballots inside. But this is the sort of thing you're talking about. These are, there's local schools. They're finding ballots of, boxes they think might have ballots in them. Large numbers of votes are just popping up kind of out of nowhere.
It's really kind of interesting. You should be able to count when you come in. Every state I've ever voted in, including Florida, you come in and you have to sign. They find your name, you sign, and they give you a ballot. You should be able to count that and say, here are the number of people that voted. How come Florida and Broward County can't tell us how many people voted? And then they're like, oh, you know what? Oh my gosh, I had this. I found these in my secure suit pocket, but here are some more. How is that possible?
Right. I mean, some states have rules where mail-in ballots can come in after Election Day. For example, California, I think today is the deadline in California, where if you mail a ballot that is mailed and postmarked by Election Day and it gets there by Friday, the vote can still count. And that's why a lot of these California House races are out there and still undecided, and maybe won't be decided for God knows how long. But that's not supposed to be the case.
We're making anything better. I don't think we're making anything better. I don't know about you, but I don't remember all these problems growing up. I don't remember them. And maybe they were all corrupt back then, but I don't remember.
I do remember some dead people in Chicago voting a few times.
Remember. Yeah, no, but that's Chicago. And, Florida, it's not you. Anybody who's lived in Florida their whole life, I don't think it's you. I think it's the corrupt Democrats that are moving out of New York. Don't let them New York your Florida. Don't do it. Because right now they're Californian, my Texas, and I don't like it. Don't let them New York your Florida. I'm telling you right now. Oh, my gosh.
Maybe a little late on that bandwagon.
I think we're really, really late on this.
As a person, by the way, I fully agree with you. As a person born in New York, currently living in Texas, completely agree with you.
Oh, I said when we moved down here, Rick Perry was the governor, and I walked in and I said, we got to take care of this border. And he said, I know, we're working on it. I said, no, you misunderstand. The northern border. You got to stop people like me from moving into the state. You got to stop. So here we go. Pac Ray from Pac Ray Unleashed is joining us now. And you, too, are a little upset about the Florida situation?
Again, Florida trying to screw up the country. What? Everything seemed fine yesterday. So, okay, we dodged a bullet in the governorship for Florida, in the Senate seat in Florida, looking pretty good in Arizona. Everything should be okay. Yes, they got the House control back, but other than that, everything went really well. Well, now it's completely changed. Maybe.
Well, Sinema in Arizona
Is
looks
ahead.
like she's ahead.
And now there's a recount in both races in Florida for Senate and for the governorship.
And the one I'm concerned about, have you guys heard anything about foul play in Arizona?
I have not.
I haven't.
Rick Scott is kind of concerned about that in Florida, obviously.
Right. I know we're talking about Florida, and I want to get Marco Rubio on today because he is on fire about this.
Should be.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard anything about foul play in Arizona. So if it's all up and up, then that's what it is. Florida is they're not saying how many more ballots they have to count. Why not?
Yeah.
How do you not know?
It's also their legal responsibility to be able to. I can't remember the name of the act, but they are legally responsible to be able to report on these things and tell them how many ballots they have left and a bunch of details. And they're just not.
Yeah, they're required to.
And
they're still not doing it.
If anyone, I'm telling you, the feds should be involved in this now. If anyone is caught tampering with these ballots, they should go to prison, not jail. They should go to prison for a very long time. We lose control of the ballot and lose faith in our election system. We've got nothing left. And you know what's really interesting is he's not my president. He was selected, not elected, because they all declared Al Gore the winner and then Bush. Okay, well, I guess you could say that about your governor, and I bet you could say that now about your senator if they end up winning. Right. Selected, not elected.
Yeah.
Did you hear about Broward County where the election supervisor was just eyeballing and making the call where the ballots weren't clear on who they voted for? She was just looking at him going, yeah, that looks like that's a Democratic one.
Wow.
Yeah. By the way, other big news.
So is that how they went from 54,000 ahead with the Rick Scott campaign down to 17,000 ahead?
Don't know. We're in our own bubble. We have everything at our fingertips, and we don't recognize that we're all in this together. We share a fate.
Glenn Beck, Mercury.
Democrats gain seriously late ground on Republicans. Everybody revs up for 2020, and we check the mailbag. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Okay, so on Tuesday night, it seemed as though the blue wave did not materialize. It was more like a slight blue tide. But as the votes have been tallied, it looks more and more like a slow-moving blue wave. Just to be completely honest about the status of the election, the reality is that early on Tuesday night, there were a couple of races that surprised everybody. The Ohio governor's race, the Ron DeSantis race in Florida, the Rick Scott race in Florida. And because of those surprises, it sort of colored everybody's perception of what had happened in the election. It looked like Democrats would pick up 30, 31, maybe 34 seats at the outside. Now it's looking like by the end of this election, because the votes are still being tallied in some places like California, Democrats could have picked up as many as 40 seats, which is a wave, and that seats that it looked like Republicans had won, including in Florida and Arizona, could still be up in the air. Right now, if you had to guess, you would suggest that Kristen Sinema, who is a radical, leftist, insane person, is going to be the new senator from Arizona over Martha McSally, the first female Air Force pilot to fly in combat. So the Arizonans apparently picked Kristen Sinema, who in 2003 suggested that she should be okay with Americans joining the Taliban, over Martha McSally, which means that Republican margin, +3 in the Senate, goes down to +2. Now, it also seems that Rick Scott in Florida, his race is now being upended by late vote counting. When I say late vote counting, I mean seriously late vote counting, because it turns out that Broward County is just a crap show. Broward County, of course, the site of the Parkland shooting, and it turns out that Broward law enforcement is a garbage heap, or at least was under Scott Israel. Well, it turns out that the Broward County electioneering officials, those guys are also terrible. The election officials also don't know what they are doing. Rick Scott has now filed a lawsuit against those election officials, according to Fox News, accusing Democrats of conducting a coordinated effort to steal elections in a campaign of possible rampant fraud. Republican Senate candidate Rick Scott filed explosive lawsuits late Thursday against the top election officials in 2 heavily Democratic counties as they continue to report new votes, and 3 major races in the state appear headed for recounts, which means that the gubernatorial race also with Ron DeSantis and Andrew Gillum could be headed for a recount. What exactly is the problem? Well, in Broward County, it turns out the officials in Broward County are refusing to even update folks on how many outstanding votes there are or how exactly they're being counted. The official in question is named Brenda Snipes. She is the person who is the supervisor, she and another woman named Susan Butcher. And Rick Scott says it has been over 48 hours since the polls closed, and Broward and Palm Beach counties are still finding and counting ballots. And the supervisors, Brenda Snipes and Susan Butcher, cannot seem to say how many ballots still exist or where these ballots come from or where they have been. And so this looks like a blatant attempt to change the results of an election. For example, Brenda Snipes, again, she's a supervisor in Broward County whose job it is to oversee these elections. She's finding votes after the statutory period for vote announcements has already been made. She's still finding votes. It's just like Florida 2000. Democrats are saying we don't have to obey any of the rules with regard to counting of votes. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to say count every vote, and then we'll just find new votes in the back room, in vans, in abandoned warehouses. Doesn't matter. We'll just come up with those votes somewhere. Here's Brenda Snipes dodging questions about how many votes there actually are outstanding.
Ms. Snipes, can you talk to us at all? Can you talk? You can't speak to us this evening?
On the local recount, they begin at the same time as the state recount.
Dr. Snipes, why did early voting take so long to count?
Okay, now Snipes, if you say that I'm being a little bit too suspicious, it would be worth noting here that Brenda Snipes has been under serious scrutiny, as well she should have been, for years, because she has been, I think she was actually fired for incompetence under Jeb Bush a long time ago. Like she's a terrible official. She's been a terrible official for a long time. In May 2018, she was under fire for gaffes. She vowed that the election would be safe from hackers, but she has a long history of stinking at her job. On May 11th, a circuit court judge ruled, this is of this year, Brenda Snipes broke federal and state law by too quickly destroying ballots from the August 2016 primaries, even though there was a pending lawsuit seeking access to those ballots. You understand? The courts told her, don't destroy those ballots because we need to look at the results of primaries there. She went ahead and destroyed the ballots anyway. That's not the only problem with Brenda Snipes. In November 2016 general election, a small number of mailed-out ballots were missing the state's medical marijuana referendum. The office attempted to contact voters who returned ballots did not include the referendum question so they could revote. Okay, well, you can't do that. In August 2016, early results were posted online a half an hour before the polls closed. You can't start posting poll results before the polls close. That violates state law. In 2016, the American Civil Rights Union sued Snipes for not doing enough to remove ineligible voters from the county rolls, increasing the potential for voter fraud. Snipes she's a terrible official. She's been a terrible official for a long time. Rick Scott went after her on Sean Hannity's show, talked about it yesterday.
Florida law says that all absentee early voting numbers must be reported within 30 minutes of the polls closing, correct?
Absolutely.
And those numbers
Sean, they found 78,000 votes. Sean, they've found 78,000 new votes since Election Day 2 days ago in Broward County, and 15,000 more votes in Palm Beach. We don't know how many more votes they're going to come up with.
And amazingly, as soon as people started making a fuss about this, including Senator Marco Rubio, suddenly Broward County stopped finding votes. It's just incredible. And Marco Rubio tweeted this out yesterday. He tweeted, Florida law requires counties report early voting and vote by mail within 30 minutes after polls closed. 43 hours after polls closed, two Democrat strongholds, Broward County and Palm Beach County, are still counting and refusing to disclose how many ballots they have left to count. Okay, that obviously is wildly inappropriate. A mandatory recount now appears imminent not only in Rick Scott race, but also in the agricultural commissioner contest and Florida's high-profile gubernatorial brawl between Democrat Andrew Gillum and Republican Ron DeSantis based on new vote totals, even though Gillum has already conceded. He says that he wants the recount, although he is not unconceded. Scott says, we have no idea how many votes they're going to come up with, but they're going to try and keep counting until they win the election, basically. We're just going to keep finding votes in random places. The National Republican Senatorial Committee specifically alleges that Snipes is in violation of the Florida Constitution and the Florida Public Records Act that demands an emergency hearing as well as a court order requiring Snipes to turn over information about ballots in Broward County. Scott's complaints against Palm Beach County Supervisor of Elections Susan Butcher, meanwhile, alleges first that officials there illegally refused to allow Republicans or any witnesses to monitor the county's handling of damaged absentee ballots. According to Scott, the officials there failed to allow the Palm Beach County Canvassing Board to determine which damaged or improperly filled out absentee ballots were valid and how the voters of those ballots had intended to vote. Instead, Butcher and her staff simply did what we remember from 2000, where they were basically looking into their heart to determine how people voted. Well, if a Democrat looks into a Democrat's heart to determine how a possible Democrat voted, I think we can all determine what exactly that vote will look like. The lawsuit that Scott has filed against Butcher demands an injunction requiring Butcher to make and compare duplicate copies of all damaged absentee ballots in the presence of Scott's representatives, which seems totally fair, and to allow the Palm Beach County Canvassing Board to determine voters' intent when counting those ballots. I mean, this is amazing, amazing stuff. Rubio has pointed to the slow drip of tens of thousands of additional ballots that were reported throughout the day Thursday, most of which were favorable to several Democratic candidates. Isn't it weird how every recount always seems to favor the Democrats? Isn't that very weird? How every single recount, it's like across the country, it always seems to favor Democrats in counties where Democratic officials are in charge of the elections? Weird. Just weird. So obviously, all of this should be deeply troubling to Republicans. With all of that said, it is pretty obvious that the 2018 message is that Republicans have a problem. Okay, if Rick Scott loses that seat in Florida, that means the Republicans end up with a net gain of just 1 in the Senate, leaving them with 52 senators, which would be a serious, serious, serious problem. If they end up with 52 senators, that is not enough to provide a bulwark against the 2020 senatorial elections, in which case the Democrats could theoretically sweep all 3 chambers of Congress, all 3 chambers, the House, the Senate, the presidency. They could sweep all of them in 2020 if Republicans don't have enough of a buffer zone. And this does lead us to have to recapitulate some of our analysis about the 2018 election, about the midterms, because the sort of comfortable analysis was that it had not been a wave, that Democrats had not scored wins across the board. People like Beto O'Rourke in Texas had gone down. The Republicans don't really have as much of a problem as people are suggesting because they retained the governor's house in Ohio as well as in Florida. But if it turns out that by the end of all of this, Democrats won more seats than they did in 2006, and they were able to only hold the Republican wins to +1, and they were able to take a couple of formerly Republican seats in the Senate, in Nevada and in Arizona, that it should be a wake-up call to Republicans. Will it be a wake-up call to Republicans? Maybe not. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.